The November drizzle painted Millbrook in shades of gray, the small town wrapped in cold mist that seemed to seep into every corner. Jack Carter killed the engine of his pickup truck and sat for a moment, shoulders heavy with exhaustion. Through the windshield, something caught his eye. There, standing on his wet lawn beneath the dim yellow porch light, were two teenage girls. Twins, perhaps 15 years old, with golden hair plastered against their faces by the rain. They wore matching red dresses that clung to their slender frames, completely inappropriate for the weather. The rain traced paths down their pale skin. Jack Carter was not the kind of man who trusted easily. At 35, he carried himself with the measured confidence of someone who had seen enough of the world to know its dangers. His 6'2" frame still held the solid build from his military days, though 5 years of civilian life had softened the edges slightly. His hands, now permanently stained with motor oil, despite endless scrubbing, told the story of honest work at Morrison's Auto Repair, the small garage on Oak Street, where he spent his days bringing dead engines back to life. The calluses on his palms matched the ones on his heart, both earned through loss and survival. His wife Sarah had been gone for 5 years now, taken by a drunk driver on a rain-slicked highway not unlike this very night. The irony wasn't lost on him that he still lived in a world full of rain while she was gone. Her photograph sat on the mantel, frozen in eternal sunshine. Her smile caught mid-laugh at something their son Ethan had said. That photo was both a comfort and a knife, depending on the day. Jack had learned to navigate grief like a ship through fog, steady and careful, always mindful of the small boy who depended on him to keep sailing. Ethan Carter, 8 years old and all knobby knees and endless questions, was Jack's anchor to the living world. The boy had his mother's curious nature and his father's stubborn streak, a combination that meant he questioned everything and wouldn't accept easy answers. His latest obsession was detective stories, devouring every mystery book the school library would let him check out. He'd set up a detective agency in the garage, complete with a cardboard sign and a notebook full of observations about the neighbors. Mrs. Henderson's cat went missing? Ethan was on the case. The newspaper arrived late? Clearly a conspiracy worth investigating. The twins on the lawn were named Alyssa and Arya Hale, though Jack wouldn't learn this for another 10 minutes. At 15, they possessed the kind of beauty that seemed almost otherworldly in the context of working-class Millbrook. Their features were refined, delicate yet striking, with high cheekbones and eyes, the color of winter sky. Everything about them screamed money and privilege, from their designer dresses to the way they held themselves despite being soaked through. Yet here they stood, on a stranger's lawn, in a town that barely merited a dot on most maps. Their mother, Victoria Hale, was at that very moment lying in a private medical facility 200 miles away, her mind clouded by carefully administered sedatives. At 38, she had built a real estate empire worth $900 million, her face once gracing the covers of business magazines. But 6 months ago, she had vanished from public view after a bitter divorce that had made headlines. The media speculated endlessly about her disappearance, but the truth was far more sinister than any tabloid story. Victoria had started her empire with a single rental property, bought with her inheritance from her grandmother, and built it into a nationwide network of luxury developments and commercial properties. Jack stepped out of his truck, the rain immediately finding its way past his collar. The girls didn't move, didn't even flinch as he approached. Up close, he could see they were shivering, their lips tinged blue from the cold. "You girls okay?" he asked, his voice carrying the gruff gentleness he usually reserved for Ethan's nightmares. The twins exchanged a glance, an entire conversation in a single look. "We need help," Alyssa said simply, her voice cultured and precise despite her chattering teeth. "Please." The desperation in her voice cut through Jack's defenses. These weren't runaways looking for adventure or rebellious rich kids fighting with their parents. This was genuine fear, the kind that made people do desperate things. "Come inside," he said, already turning toward the house. "Let's get you warm and dry first, then we can figure out what's going on." The girls followed him, their steps uncertain on legs stiff with cold. As they walked, Jack noticed how they positioned themselves, always keeping each other in sight, always watching the shadows beyond the porch light. Whatever had brought them here, It had taught them to be afraid. The kitchen was warm and filled with the aroma of leftover pot roast that Jack had reheated for dinner. He'd given them towels and pointed them toward the bathroom, where Sarah's old clothes still hung in the closet, untouched these 5 years. He couldn't bring himself to donate them, and now, perhaps, they'd serve a purpose. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his detective notebook open, pencil poised. "Dad, who are they?" he whispered, though his whisper could probably be heard in the next county. "I don't know yet, buddy," Jack replied, setting out 3 extra plates. The normalcy of the action felt surreal, given the circumstances. 2 teenage girls appearing from nowhere, designer clothes, no explanation. Every instinct from his military days screamed danger, but he couldn't turn away children in need. Sarah wouldn't have. Sarah would have had them wrapped in blankets with hot chocolate in their hands before asking a single question. When the girls emerged, swimming in Sarah's old sweaters and jeans, they looked younger, more vulnerable. They sat at the table carefully, as if afraid to take up too much space. Arya picked at her food, while Alyssa watched the doors and windows, with subtle glances that Jack recognized from his own training. These girls were running from something, or someone. "Where are your parents?" Jack asked, trying to keep his tone conversational. The twins exchanged another of those loaded looks. "Our mother is away," Alyssa said carefully. "Our father isn't in the picture anymore." The way she said it suggested finality, divorce, or death, but Jack didn't push. Ethan, however, had no such restraint. "Are you princesses?" he asked, earning a surprised laugh from Arya. "No," she said, and for a moment her guard dropped, revealing a genuine smile. "But sometimes it felt like we lived in a tower." The evening wore on with stilted conversation and long silences. Jack set up the pull-out couch in the living room, gathering extra blankets from the hall closet. The girls thanked him repeatedly, their gratitude tinged with something that looked like guilt. As he headed to his own room, he caught them whispering urgently to each other, their words too quiet to make out but their tone unmistakably worried. Sleep didn't come easily for Jack that night. He lay in bed, listening to the rain against the windows and the occasional creak from the living room. His pistol sat in the nightstand drawer, loaded but locked, a precaution he'd taken since Sarah's death. He didn't really think the girls were dangerous, but whoever they were running from might be. At 2 in the morning, he heard footsteps and peered out to find Alyssa standing at the window, peering through the curtains into the darkness. She stood there for nearly an hour before returning to the couch. The rain intensified around midnight, turning into a proper storm with thunder that rattled the windows. Between thunderclaps, he could hear movement downstairs, restless footsteps on old floorboards. Jack recognized the pattern of someone keeping watch, someone who'd learned that vigilance was the price of survival. These girls had been running for more than just a few hours. They'd been running long enough to develop habits, routines, the kind of hyper-awareness that came from genuine danger. Whatever their story, it was bigger than teenage drama. These girls were in real trouble. And, by extension, so was he now. But Jack had never been able to walk away from people who needed help. It was both his greatest weakness and his defining strength, the thing that made him who he was. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, the rain having softened to a persistent mist. Jack woke early, as was his habit, and found both girls already awake, sitting rigidly on the couch, as if they'd been caught doing something wrong. "Coffee?" he offered, and they shook their heads in unison. Ethan bounded down the stairs, still in his dinosaur pajamas, and immediately began interrogating them about their favorite books, movies, and whether they'd ever solved a mystery. It was during breakfast that Jack first noticed the black SUV. It crept past the house slowly, too slowly for normal traffic. Its windows tinted so dark they might as well have been painted black. The girls noticed it too, both of them going rigid, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. The vehicle continued past, but Jack saw it circle back 10 minutes later. This time, it stopped at the corner, engine running, just sitting there like a predator watching prey. "Friends of yours?" Jack asked quietly. Alyssa's knuckles were white as she gripped her orange juice glass. "We can't go back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We just can't." Arya had tears in her eyes, though she was fighting hard not to let them fall. These weren't dramatic teenagers making a scene. This was real fear. The kind Jack had seen in war zones, the kind that came from genuine danger. He made a decision then, one that would change everything. "Ethan, why don't you show the girls your detective agency in the garage?" he suggested. His son's face lit up, and he immediately began dragging them toward the back door, chattering about his cases and evidence collection methods. Once they were gone, Jack walked out onto his front porch, coffee mug in hand, and stared directly at the SUV. He stood there, unwavering, until finally, after 5 long minutes, the vehicle pulled away. But Jack knew it would be back. He'd been a soldier long enough to recognize surveillance when he saw it. Someone was watching these girls, waiting for the right moment to make a move. The question was whether they were trying to protect them or take them. Given the girl's reaction, Jack was betting on the latter. He pulled out his phone and called in sick to work, something he'd never done in 5 years. Morrison would understand, or he wouldn't, but either way, Jack wasn't leaving these kids alone with that black SUV circling like a shark. The morning stretched into afternoon, the rain finally breaking to reveal weak sunshine that did little to warm the air. The girls had relaxed slightly in Ethan's presence, his innocent enthusiasm apparently infectious. Arya was helping him catalog his evidence bags, which mostly contained random objects he'd found around the neighborhood, while Alyssa watched the windows, that hypervigilance never quite leaving her. It was then that Arya's bracelet fell off, a delicate gold thing that probably cost more than Jack made in 6 months. It hit the concrete floor of the garage with a distinctive clink, and as Arya scrambled to retrieve it, Jack caught sight of the engraving. It was a logo, elaborate and distinctive, the kind of thing that whispered old money and exclusivity. He didn't recognize it, but he knew someone who would. Tommy Chen had been Jack's squadmate in Afghanistan and now worked as a journalist in the city, covering everything from politics to business with the same intensity he'd once brought to combat patrols. Jack snapped a quick photo of the bracelet when Arya wasn't looking and sent it to Tommy with a simple message. "Need to know what this is." The response came back within an hour, and it made Jack's blood run cold. That's the Hale Industries logo. As in Victoria Hale, the real estate mogul who disappeared 6 months ago. "Jesus, Jack, her kids have been missing for 3 days. It's all over the news here. Where did you see this?" Jack stepped outside to call Tommy, keeping his voice low. "The twins are here, at my house. They showed up last night, scared out of their minds. There's been a black SUV watching the place all morning." Tommy's whistle was low and worried. "Jack, this is big. Victoria Hale is worth about $900 million. The divorce was brutal. Accusations flying both ways. Then she just vanished. And the kids disappeared from their boarding school 3 days ago." "What kind of accusations?" Jack asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The ex-husband, Richard Brennan, claimed she was mentally unstable, danger to herself and the kids. She claimed he was abusive, controlling, trying to steal her company. The courts were still sorting it out when she disappeared. "Jack, if those kids are with you, you need to call the police." But Jack thought about the terror in the girls' eyes. The way they'd said they couldn't go back. "Not yet," he decided. "Let me talk to them first." Tommy sighed. "Be careful, brother. This isn't some small-town drama. These people have enough money to make problems disappear, and I mean permanently." When Jack returned to the garage, he found Ethan teaching the girls a card trick he'd learned from a library book. For a moment, they looked like normal teenagers, laughing at Ethan's dramatic presentation. But when they saw Jack's face, the walls went back up immediately. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Ethan, why don't you go watch television for a bit?" His son started to protest, but something in Jack's tone stopped him. Once alone with the girls, Jack set the bracelet on the workbench between them. "Hale Industries," he said simply. Both girls paled, and Arya's hand went unconsciously to her wrist where the bracelet had been. "You're Victoria Hale's daughters." It wasn't a question. Alyssa lifted her chin, a gesture so like her mother's boardroom photos that it was unmistakable. Yes, she said. And if you send us back, they'll use us to control her. Who's they? Jack asked, though he was already piecing it together. Our father, for one, Arya said bitterly. But it's bigger than that. Our mother didn't just disappear. She's being held at a private psychiatric facility called Serenity Pines. They're keeping her drugged, saying she had a breakdown. But she didn't. She was trying to protect us, trying to keep the company from being stolen. The story came out in fragments, each girl adding details the other had forgotten or been too frightened to mention. Victoria had discovered that her ex-husband was embezzling from her company, using his position as CFO to funnel money to offshore accounts. When she'd confronted him, he'd turned violent, though never in ways that left visible marks. The divorce had been her escape, but Richard had connections, judges and doctors and police officials who owed him favors or could be bought. The night Mom disappeared, Alyssa said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks, she called us at school. She said if anything happened to her, we should run. She said they'd try to use us to make her sign papers, to give up the company. She made us memorize a phone number, someone she trusted. But when we called it, the line was disconnected. Jack felt the weight of their trust settling on his shoulders. These weren't just scared kids. They were pawns in a game worth nearly $1 billion. And now, by helping them, he'd placed himself and Ethan directly in the crosshairs. But looking at their faces, so young despite their attempted bravery, he knew he couldn't turn them over to whoever was in that SUV. Do you know where the Serenity Pines is? He asked. Arya nodded. It's about 3 hours north, in the mountains. Very exclusive, very private, the kind of place where rich people go to disappear. She'd drawn a rough map, noting landmarks and security features she'd observed during a failed attempt to visit their mother. Jack studied it with a tactical eye, already seeing possibilities. The revelation came during dinner, as Jack was reviewing the crude map Alyssa had drawn of Serenity Pines from memory. She'd visited once, before her mother was held there, when they'd gone to see a family friend recovering from addiction. The facility was a fortress dressed as a wellness retreat, all high walls and security cameras hidden among meditation gardens and therapy pools. Arya was explaining the shift patterns she'd observed when her phone, which had been turned off since they'd arrived, suddenly buzzed with a text. The girl went white as she read it, her hand shaking as she showed it to her sister. Then, wordlessly, she handed it to Jack. The message was simple. Your mother needs you. Uncle Marcus. Jack didn't understand the significance until Alyssa explained, her voice hollow with betrayal. Marcus is Mom's younger brother. He's supposed to be in Europe, managing the international division. If he's here, if he's involved. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. It wasn't just Richard Brennan trying to steal the company. It was a coordinated betrayal, family and ex-husband, working together to strip Victoria of everything she'd built. Marcus Hale had always resented his sister's success, Arya explained. Always felt he deserved more than the generous salary and position she'd given him. He wanted the throne, not just a seat at the table. He's the one who recommended Serenity Pines, Alyssa realized, horror dawning on her face. When Mom was stressed about the divorce, he suggested she go there for a spa weekend, just to relax. She didn't go, but he kept pushing, saying it would be good for her image in the custody battle to show she was taking care of her mental health. Jack felt the urgency ratcheting up. If Marcus was back from Europe, it meant they were moving to the final phase of whatever plan they'd concocted. Legal documents that needed Victoria's signature, perhaps, or maybe something more permanent. A tragic overdose at a psychiatric facility wouldn't raise too many eyebrows, especially for a woman with a documented history of mental instability, even if that documentation was fabricated. We need to move tonight, Jack decided. But first, I need backup. He called Tommy again, this time putting him on speaker so the girls could hear. Tommy's investigation had uncovered more dirt in the hours since they'd spoken. Marcus Hale had indeed returned from Europe 3 days ago, coinciding with the girl's disappearance. More disturbing, he'd been seen at the courthouse with Richard Brennan and a judge who'd recently made several questionable rulings in custody cases. There's more, Tommy said. I found a nurse who used to work at Serenity Pines. She quit 6 months ago, right around when Victoria was admitted. She wouldn't talk on record, but she said patients who go into the isolation wing sometimes don't come out the same, if they come out at all. Said the director, Dr. Eugene Hoffman, has a reputation for making problems disappear for the right price. Jack looked at the girls, saw his own determination reflected in their eyes. Tommy, I need you to do something for me. In exactly 4 hours, I need you to call in an anonymous tip about seeing the Hale twins in Millbrook. Make sure it goes through official channels. Lots of noise. I want everyone looking in this direction while we head north. Tommy understood immediately. You're going after her. Jack, that's insane. You need cops, FBI. Someone with actual authority. But Jack was already shaking his head. By the time we convince anyone to listen, it could be too late. Besides, cops can be bought. I'd rather do this my way. After hanging up, Jack turned to Ethan, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet throughout dinner. Buddy, you're going to stay with Mrs. Henderson tonight, okay? I have to help Alyssa and Arya with something important. Ethan's eyes were serious behind his glasses. You're going to rescue their mom, aren't you? Like in my books, when the detective saves someone from the bad guys. Jack knelt beside his son, torn between protecting his innocence and respecting his intelligence. Something like that, yeah. But this isn't a story, Ethan. It's dangerous, and I need to know you're safe. Ethan nodded solemnly, then threw his arms around Jack's neck. Be careful, Dad. Mom wouldn't want you to get hurt. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. Sarah wouldn't want him risking everything for strangers. But she also wouldn't want him to turn away from children in need. He hugged Ethan tighter, breathing in the little boy scent of graham crackers and playground dirt. I'll be careful, he promised, hoping it wasn't a lie. An hour later, they were ready. Jack had retrieved things from his military footlocker he'd hoped never to need again. Night vision goggles, tactical gear, and a few other items that would have raised eyebrows if anyone knew a small-town mechanic possessed them. The girls had changed into dark clothing, their faces set with determination that made them look older than their 15 years. Jack had sketched out a plan based on Alyssa's map and what they could find online about Serenity Pines. The facility operated on a skeleton crew at night, just 2 security guards and a single nurse for the isolation wing. The main building would be full of regular patients and staff, but the isolation wing was separate, connected by a single corridor that could be accessed through a service entrance used for deliveries. The drive north was tense, the girls silent in the back seat of Jack's truck. He'd switched the license plates, a precaution from his paranoid days after returning from deployment. The rain had returned, heavier now, which was both good and bad. Good for cover, bad for visibility. As they climbed into the mountains, the temperature dropped, and snow began mixing with the rain. Serenity Pines appeared through the trees like something from a Gothic novel, all stone walls and narrow windows lit from within. Jack parked a quarter-mile away, hidden among the trees. You two stay here, he said. But both girls immediately protested. She's our mother, Alyssa said fiercely. We're coming. Jack wanted to argue, but he recognized the futility. These girls had already risked everything to escape and find help. They weren't going to sit in the truck while he played hero. They approached through the woods, Jack leading with the night vision goggles, the girls following in his footsteps. The service entrance was exactly where Alyssa had said it would be, a simple metal door with a keypad lock. Jack pulled out a small device he'd acquired during a classified mission he still couldn't talk about, attached it to the keypad, and waited. 30 seconds later, the lock clicked open. The corridor inside was dimly lit and smelled of industrial disinfectant. They moved quickly, but quietly, Jack's combat training taking over. The isolation wing was down one flight of stairs and through a set of double doors marked authorized personnel only. They could hear voices from somewhere deeper in the building, but this section seemed deserted. They found Victoria in the third room they checked. She was lying on a narrow bed, wrists secured with soft restraints that were more about preventing her from removing the IV than actual imprisonment. Her face was gaunt, her usually styled blonde hair limp and tangled. But when her eyes focused on her daughters, Jack saw the sharp intelligence that had built an empire. My girls, she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse or medication. You came. Alyssa and Arya were at her side immediately, working to undo the restraints, while Jack kept watch. Victoria tried to sit up, swayed, and Jack had to catch her. The drugs, she mumbled. They keep giving me drugs. Makes everything fuzzy. Jack checked the IV bag. Sedatives. From what he could tell, a cocktail designed to keep her compliant, but not completely unconscious. He carefully removed the IV, using skills he'd learned from combat medics. Can you walk? He asked. Victoria nodded, though her movements were uncoordinated. I'll walk through hell to get out of here, she said. And despite everything, Jack found himself smiling at her determination. They were halfway back to the service door when everything went wrong. The lights suddenly blazed on, and an alarm began wailing. Standing in the corridor ahead of them was Dr. Hoffman himself, a thin man with cold eyes, flanked by 2 security guards who looked more like mercenaries than medical staff. Mrs. Hale, the doctor said smoothly, you're in no condition to be wandering the halls, and you've involved your children in your delusions. How unfortunate. He gestured to the guards. Please escort them back to Mrs. Hale's room. We'll need to increase her medication, clearly. Jack stepped forward, placing himself between the guards and the family. I don't think so, he said quietly. The guards laughed, seeing only a single man protecting 3 females. They didn't see the soldier who'd once held off 12 Taliban fighters to protect a medical convoy. They didn't see the father who would die before letting these children be taken. The fight was brutal but brief. Jack had lost none of his edge, and the guards had expected an easy target. The first went down with a strike to the throat, gasping for air. The second pulled a gun, but Jack was already moving, disarming him with a move that broke his wrist. The gun skittered across the floor, and Alyssa, surprising everyone, including herself, kicked it further away. Dr. Hoffman had backed against the wall, his composure cracking. You don't understand, he said desperately. There are powerful people involved. You can't just take her. They'll find you. They'll destroy you. Jack grabbed him by the collar, lifting him slightly off his feet. Let them try, he said. Then, with calculated precision, he rendered the doctor unconscious with a sleeper hold, letting him slump to the floor. They ran then, Victoria supported between her daughters, Jack leading the way. Behind them, they could hear more guards responding to the alarm. They burst through the service door into the rain and snow, the cold air shocking after the antiseptic warmth of the facility. Jack could hear pursuit getting closer as they reached the truck. Go, 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 he shouted, starting the engine before everyone was fully inside. The truck fishtailed on the wet gravel as he accelerated, and in the rearview mirror, he could see flashlights and shapes running after them. Then they were on the mountain road, speeding through the darkness with the wipers struggling against the rain and snow. The chase came 20 minutes later. 2 black SUVs appeared behind them, gaining fast despite Jack's aggressive driving. The mountain road was treacherous in good weather. In this storm, it was potentially deadly. Jack pushed the truck harder, taking curves at dangerous speeds, the girls silent and white-knuckled in their seats. There, Victoria said suddenly, pointing to a small side road almost hidden by trees. Old logging road. Leads to the valley. Jack didn't hesitate, yanking the wheel hard. The truck skidded, tires screaming, but made the turn. The SUVs overshot, brakes lighting up the night as they tried to stop and turn around. The logging road was rough, more path than road, and the truck bounced violently over roots and rocks. But Jack had driven worse in Afghanistan, and he kept control, navigating by instinct and occasional flashes of lightning. Behind them, only one SUV had made the turn, its lights bouncing crazily as it struggled to follow. They emerged from the forest onto a paved road Jack recognized. They were only 10 miles from Millbrook. He pulled out his phone, handed it to Alyssa. Call Tommy Chen. Tell him we're coming in hot, and to have his camera ready. She did, and Tommy's response was immediate. He'd already alerted his editor, and a news crew was standing by.